I'm Sabina, 29, a nurse from Portland. I fell head over heels for James, whose family has more money than I've ever dreamed of. When he introduced me to them, I was so hopeful they'd welcome me with open arms. But at his birthday party, everything shattered when his mother screamed those words that still echo in my mind. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I kept my dignity intact. My life before James was straightforward. I worked double shifts at Portland Memorial Hospital, trying to chip away at my mountain of student loans. My apartment was tiny, my furniture secondhand, but it was mine, earned through hard work. I was proud of my independence, even if it came with financial struggles. I met James on a particularly hectic Tuesday. He was visiting his college roommate who had appendicitis, and I was the nurse assigned to the room. When he thanked me for taking good care of his friend, there was a genuine warmth in his eyes that made my heart skip. He asked for my number before leaving, and against hospital policy, I gave it to him. Our first date was at a small coffee shop where we talked for hours. I was immediately drawn to how he listened, really listened when I spoke. He didn't check his phone or look around the room. His focus was entirely on me, making me feel like the most interesting person in the world. "I'd like to take you somewhere nicer next time," he said as we left. "This was perfect," I replied honestly. "I don't need fancy places." As we continued dating, I learnt that James came from significant wealth. His father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the West Coast, and James worked as the marketing director for the company. Despite this, he never flaunted his money or made me feel less than. He seemed to prefer the simple dates I could afford to contribute to our Thai takeout dinners, at my apartment picnics in the park, or matinee movies. "Most people want me for what my family has," he confessed one night 3 months into our relationship. "You're the first person who seems to like me for just being me." The first time I spoke to his mother, Diane, was during a phone call while we were having dinner. James put her on speaker, and her voice was pleasant enough. "So James tells me you're a nurse. How admirable to work in such a service position," she said, and I noticed James wince slightly. "Mum Sabina is incredibly skilled. She graduated top of her class," so he said quickly. "Of course, dear. I'm sure she's very good at what she does." Something about her tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Everyone gets nervous talking to their boyfriend's parents for the first time, right? 8 months into our relationship, James proposed. It wasn't an elaborate affair he could have easily afforded. Instead, he took me back to the coffee shop where we had our first date. He got down on one knee with a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious. "I don't want to spend another day without knowing you'll be my wife," he said simply. Tears streaming down my face, I said yes, without hesitation. I truly believed I had found my forever person, someone who valued me for who I was, not what I had or didn't have. Meeting his family properly was the next step. I spent hours choosing my outfit for our first dinner together, settling on a navy blue dress that was the most expensive thing in my closet, purchased on sale 2 years prior for a colleague's wedding. Their house was more of a mansion, with a circular driveway and manicured gardens. I felt my stomach knot as James parked his car. "They'll love you," he assured me, squeezing my hand. "Just be yourself." Diane greeted us at the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was immaculately dressed in what I would later learn was a Chanel suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled. "Welcome, Sabina. We've heard so much about you," she said, air-kissing my cheeks. James's father, Richard, was warmer, giving me a genuine handshake and a smile that reminded me of his son's. Throughout dinner, I noticed Diane's subtle glances at my dress, my hands the way I held my silverware. Each look felt like a tiny judgment. "And where did you say you live, Sabina?" she asked over dessert. "In the Hawthorne district," I replied. "Oh," she said with a slight purse of her lips. "Isn't that where all those vintage shops are? How quaint." "Sabina loves her neighborhood," James interjected. "She's walking distance from some great restaurants. I'm sure it's very convenient for your budget." Diane smiled thinly. By the end of the evening, I had a nagging feeling that James's mother found me lacking, but I tried to focus on the positives. James loved me. We were getting married. Eventually, Diane would see that I made her son happy, and that would be enough. How naive I was back then, thinking love would be enough to bridge the chasm between our worlds. The engagement period should have been the happiest time of my life. Instead, it became a battleground where Diane asserted control over every aspect of our wedding, and I slowly lost my voice. "Darling, you can't possibly want those simple arrangements," Diane said, dismissing the wildflower bouquets I had shown her. "For a Preston wedding, we need something more sophisticated." We were sitting in the sunroom of her house, surrounded by wedding magazines and sample books. What was supposed to be an afternoon of collaborative planning had quickly become Diane overriding every suggestion I made. I think wildflowers have their own sophistication, I tried to argue, and they remind me of hiking with my dad when I was little. Diane patted my hand condescendingly. This isn't about childhood memories, dear. It's about presenting the right image. The Prestons have a certain standard to uphold. James, who had promised to help with the planning, was mysteriously called into an emergency work meeting, leaving me alone with his mother. As the weeks passed, every decision followed the same pattern. The venue I loved was too rustic. We ended up at the Grand Pavilion Hotel, owned by a friend of Richard's. My choice of photographer was inexperienced. We went with someone who had shot for Vogue. Even my dress became a point of contention. You need to let me contribute to something, I told James one night, frustrated after another planning session where I felt completely steamrolled. This is becoming your mother's wedding, not ours. She just wants the best for us. James sighed, rubbing his temples. And they're paying for most of it. I just think we should pick our battles. But we're not picking any battles. We're surrendering everything. James took my hands in his. Look, once the wedding is over, things will settle down. Let's just get through this, okay? For peace's sake. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I tried to contribute financially, setting aside a portion of each paycheck for wedding expenses. When I proudly presented Diane with a check for $5,000 I had saved, she looked at it like I had handed her a dirty tissue. Oh, Sabina, that's sweet but unnecessary. This is our gift to you both. Please, I want to pay for something. Maybe the band or the flowers. She slipped the check back across the table. $5,000 wouldn't cover either of those, dear. Perhaps you should save it. I know things are tight for you. The dismissal stung worse than if she had simply rejected my offer outright. My best friend Tara noticed the change in me as the wedding approached. We were having coffee and I was showing her photos of centerpieces Diane had selected. Sabina, when was the last time you smiled about this wedding? She asked bluntly. What do you mean I'm excited? No, you're not. You look like you're planning a funeral, not your wedding. And you never talk about what you want anymore. It's always Diane chose this or Diane thinks that. I felt tears welling up but blinked them back. She's just very involved. She's controlling everything and James is letting her. Are you sure this is what you want? Because marriage doesn't make these problems go away. It amplifies them. I didn't want to hear it then. I was too invested, too in love with James, too determined to make it work. The wedding day itself was objectively beautiful. The Grand Pavilion was transformed with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers. My dress was designer, selected by Diane, admittedly stunning, but nothing like the simpler style I had originally wanted. As I walked down the aisle, James's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, everything felt worth it. This was about us, not the extravagant surroundings. The reception was a different story. I barely knew half the guests, most of them business associates of Richard's or friends of Diane's. My family, small and unassuming, clustered at a table far from the head table, looking uncomfortable in their best clothes that still paled in comparison to the designer outfits surrounding them. When Diane gave her speech, she spoke eloquently about welcoming me into their family. We are so fortunate that James has found someone with such a good heart, she said, glass raised. Sabina may come from humble beginnings, but we're certain she'll flourish in her new life. My parents exchanged glances and my father's jaw tightened slightly. The words were perfect on the surface, but the subtext was clear. I was a charity case being elevated by their family's generosity. Later, as James and I danced, I whispered, "Did you notice how your mum made it sound like you rescued me from poverty?" "You're being sensitive," he murmured back. She meant it as a compliment. Maybe he genuinely believed that. Maybe he had been conditioned his whole life to hear the sweetness in his mother's barbed words. Our honeymoon in Bali was like a beautiful bubble free from family influence. For 2 weeks, we were just James and Sabina, two people in love, exploring temples, swimming in the ocean, and making plans for our future. "I want at least 2 kids," James said, as we watched the sunset on our last evening. "Me too," I agreed. "And I want them to know the value of hard work, no matter what advantages they have." "Absolutely." He nodded. No trust fund babies in our house. We returned home to a new reality. James's parents had gifted us a substantial down payment for a house in West Hills, one of Portland's most affluent neighborhoods. It was beautiful with 4 bedrooms and a view of the mountains, but it was also a constant reminder of their financial power over our lives. "We can pay them back over time," I suggested as we unpacked. James looked confused. "Why would we do that? It's a gift." Because then it would feel more like ours. He kissed my forehead. It is ours, Sabina. You're a Preston now. Our family takes care of each other. I didn't realize then how that care would become a chain. The first year of marriage brought subtle but persistent changes to our relationship. What had felt like a partnership began to feel increasingly imbalanced with James's family wealth and influence, casting a long shadow over our decisions. Decorating our new home became the first battleground. I had saved interior design magazines for years, dreaming of the day I could create a cozy, eclectic space of my own. But when I started ordering furniture and decor, Diane began making unannounced visits. "Oh, darling, you're not really considering that sofa, are you?" she said, wrinkling her nose at the blue velvet couch I had fallen in love with. "It's so bohemian. Let me call my interior designer. Margot did all our houses and she's brilliant." "I appreciate the offer, Diane, but I've been planning this for a long time. I want our home to reflect our taste." "Of course, dear. But James grew up with certain standards. I'm not sure he'd be comfortable with such an unconventional style." Before I knew it, Margot the designer had taken over and our home began filling with expensive, perfectly coordinated furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine but felt nothing like me. James seemed satisfied with the results complementing the professional touch. "But it doesn't feel like us," I protested one evening. "It feels like a showroom." "It's elegant," James countered, and my mother went to a lot of trouble to help us. Diane's weekly visits became a fixture in our lives. She would arrive unannounced often with some new decoration or suggestion for improvement. Each time she would rearrange something, subtly erasing my presence from our home. Meanwhile, James was working longer hours at his father's company. The promised partnership we'd discussed during dating, where we'd make decisions together and support each other's careers, began to feel like a distant memory. "I can't say no to these client dinners," he would explain when missing yet another evening we'd planned together. "Dad is grooming me to take over eventually. This is for our future." I continued my nursing job despite increasing hints from both James and Diane that it wasn't necessary. "You don't need to exhaust yourself with those long shifts anymore," Diane mentioned during Sunday brunch. "James makes more than enough to support you both." "I love my job," I replied firmly, "and my income is important to me." "Such an admirable work ethic," she said with a tight smile. "From your upbringing, I suppose." Our financial arrangement became another source of tension. We had established a joint account, but James also maintained separate accounts where his family money was deposited. While my entire nursing salary went into our shared finances, only a portion of his income did the same. "Why do we need separate accounts?" I asked after discovering he had made a substantial investment without discussing it with me. "It's just simpler this way," he explained. "The family has certain financial structures in place. It doesn't mean anything about us." But it did. It meant that despite working full-time in a demanding profession, my contribution was seen as minimal compared to the Preston wealth. At family dinners, my professional accomplishments were glossed over, while James's business deals were celebrated extensively. Sabina was nominated for the hospital's Nursing Excellence Award, James mentioned at one dinner. "How nice," Diane said dismissively, before immediately turning to James. "Now tell your father about that hotel acquisition you're working on." Over time, I found myself withdrawing from my own friends and family, partly because our new social calendar revolved around Preston connections, and partly because I was embarrassed by how my life had changed. I didn't want my parents to see how diminished I felt in my marriage, and I couldn't bear Tara's knowing looks when I cancelled plans again for another Preston obligation. Attempts to discuss these issues with James increasingly led to arguments. "You're being oversensitive again," became his common refrain. "My parents are just trying to help us." "Help shouldn't make someone feel smaller," I would counter, but my words seemed to bounce off him. As our first anniversary approached, I found myself struggling with periods of sadness and frustration. The Sabina who had been confident in her independence seemed to be fading, replaced by someone who constantly second-guessed herself. Then came the news that changed everything. I was pregnant. The test showed positive after I'd been feeling unusually tired and nauseous for weeks. My emotions were a complicated mix of joy and apprehension. A baby would bond us forever, but it would also tie me more deeply to the Preston family dynamics that were already suffocating me. When I told James, his face lit up with genuine happiness for the first time in months. "This is amazing," he said, spinning me around our kitchen. "A Preston heir." I winced at his choice of words. Not our baby, but a Preston heir. That evening, against my wishes, he called his parents immediately to share the news. "Mum is thrilled," he reported afterward. She's already thinking about the nursery. A chill ran down my spine. I placed my hand protectively over my still flat stomach, making a silent promise to my baby that somehow things would be different for them. I just didn't know then how much worse things would get before that promise could be fulfilled. The next 7 months of my pregnancy became a masterclass in losing control of my own experience. What should have been an intimate journey between me, James, and our growing baby became another production managed by Diane Preston. "You simply must see Dr. Grayson," Diane insisted when I mentioned my regular OB-GYN. "He's delivered for all the prominent families in Portland. I've already spoken to him and he's expecting your call." "I'm comfortable with Dr. Lou," I protested. "She's been my doctor for years." "Sabina, darling, this is a Preston baby. Only the best will do." The problem was Dr. Grayson's practice didn't accept my insurance, meaning each visit came with a hefty out-of-pocket cost. When I mentioned this to James, he shrugged it off. "Mom and Dad want to cover all the pregnancy expenses. Just let them handle it." But accepting their financial help meant accepting their control, a pattern I was beginning to recognize all too well. The nursery became another battleground. I had envisioned a gender-neutral room with woodland creatures and soft greens. Diane had other ideas. "Since you're having a girl, we must do it in the Preston tradition," she declared after the 20-week scan revealed we were having a daughter. "All Preston girls have pink nurseries with the family crib." The family crib turned out to be an ornate antique piece that gave me anxiety just looking at it with its peeling paint and outdated safety features. "We can have it refinished with non-toxic paint," Diane dismissed when I raised concerns. She brought in the same interior designer who had decorated our house, and before I could stop it, the nursery was transformed into a pink palace that looked beautiful but felt nothing like the cozy space I had dreamed of creating for our daughter. Financial pressure began mounting as my pregnancy progressed. The hospital where I worked offered only 6 weeks of partial paid maternity leave, after which I had planned to return part-time. But complications developed in my 6-month high blood pressure that concerned my doctors. "We're recommending you start your leave early," Dr. Grayson told me at my 28-week appointment. "Bed rest would be best for you and the baby." This meant going on unpaid leave much earlier than planned, significantly reducing our household income. When I expressed my worry to James, his response was predictable. "Don't worry about money, Sabina. Focus on staying healthy. My family will help if we need it." But I did worry. Every medical bill, every baby item, every day, I wasn't working chipped away at my financial independence. And with each Preston-funded purchase, I felt the noose of obligation tightening. The baby shower was the next event to be commandeered. I had hoped for a small gathering with close friends and family. Instead, Diane planned an extravagant affair at the country club with over 60 guests, most of whom I barely knew. "Your friends from the hospital can come too, of course," she said magnanimously, as if including my actual friends was a favour rather than a given. Tara called me the week before the shower, confusion evident in her voice. "Sabina, I just got this fancy invitation to your baby shower, but it's being hosted by your mother-in-law. I thought we were planning something small at my place with the girls from work." "We were, but Diane took over," I sighed. "It's easier not to fight it." "Are you okay? You don't sound like yourself anymore." I burst into tears, hormones amplifying the emotions I'd been suppressing. "I don't know who I am anymore, Tara. I feel like I'm disappearing into this family." "Oh, honey," she said softly. "We need to get you out of there for a day. Let me pick you up tomorrow." But the next day, my blood pressure spiked again, and the doctor ordered strict bed rest. No outings, no baby shower, no escape. The isolation grew as my pregnancy progressed. Confined to bed, my world shrank to the 4 walls of our bedroom. "James was working longer hours than ever to make up for the income we're losing from your leave," he explained. And into the vacuum of his absence stepped Diane, who decided that my bed rest meant she needed to temporarily move in. "You need someone to take care of you, and James is so busy," she insisted, bringing in her suitcases without waiting for my response. What followed was perhaps the most difficult period of my adult life. Trapped in my bedroom, I listened as Diane ran my household, rearranged my kitchen, and entertained her friends in my living room. When James came home each evening, exhausted from work, he would express gratitude to his mother rather than checking on my mental state. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," he would say while I silently screamed for someone to save me instead. The nursery was completed without my input, a pink wonderland that reflected nothing of me. Baby clothes arrived daily, all selected by Diane, all more elaborate and impractical than I would have chosen. One afternoon, while Diane was out at her hair appointment, I managed to call Tara. "I can't do this anymore," I sobbed into the phone. "I feel like a prisoner in my own home." "This isn't right, Sabina," she said firmly. "This is your baby, your home, your life. You need to talk to James." "I've tried, but he doesn't see it. He thinks his mother is being helpful." "Then make him see it, or come stay with me until he does." I considered it the thought of escape tempting, but with my medical complications and only weeks until my due date, it seemed impossible. Instead, I promised myself that after the baby came, things would change. I would find my voice again for my daughter's sake, if not my own. I didn't realize then that it would take a public humiliation to finally break the cycle. Emma Grace Preston arrived on a rainy April morning after 26 hours of labor. She was perfect. 7 pounds 2 ounces with James's blue eyes and what might eventually be my auburn hair. Holding her in my arms, I felt a fierce love and protection I had never experienced before. "She's beautiful," James whispered, tears in his eyes, as he held our daughter for the first time. For a brief shining moment, we were just a family of 3, cocooned in the hospital room, the outside world and all its complications temporarily at bay. Then Diane swept in with an armful of pink balloons and a professional photographer. "Let me see my granddaughter," she demanded, practically plucking Emma from my arms before I could protest. "Oh, she has the Preston nose. Thank goodness." The photographer started snapping pictures as Diane posed with Emma, and I caught James's eye, silently pleading for him to intervene. He gave me an apologetic shrug, but said nothing. The first few weeks at home with Emma were a blur of sleepless nights, recovery pain, and Diane's constant presence. She had extended her stay to help with the baby, which mostly meant critiquing my mothering skills and taking over whenever Emma cried. "She just settles better for me," Diane would say as she whisked my daughter away. "It's the grandmother touch." My postpartum emotions swung wildly, and more than once I found myself crying in the bathroom door, locked the only private space left in my home. James, back at work after a mere 3 days off, seemed oblivious to my struggles. "Mum says you seem a bit unstable," he mentioned one evening. "She's worried about postpartum depression." "I'm not depressed, James," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm frustrated because your mother won't let me mother my own child." "She's just trying to help. You should be grateful." Grateful, that word again, as if I should thank them for systematically stripping away my agency in my own life. As Emma turned 2 months old, Diane finally returned to her own home, but her influence remained strong. She still visited daily, still questioned every decision I made for Emma, still treated me like an incompetent child rather than an adult and mother. Then came James's birthday, his first since Emma's birth. Despite my suggestion that we have a quiet celebration, just the 3 of us, Diane insisted on hosting a party at our house. "We always have a proper celebration for James's birthday," she declared. "Tradition is important for Emma to learn." The preparations were elaborate. Diane hired caterers, decorators, and even a bartender. The guest list grew to include James's colleagues, his father's business associates, and various Preston family friends. The costs mounted with each new addition. "I'd like to contribute to the party expenses," I told James a week before the event. "It's your birthday and I want to be part of it." "That's sweet, but unnecessary," he replied. "Mum has it covered." What James didn't know was that our finances had become increasingly strained. My maternity leave was unpaid now, and Emma had developed colic that required specialised formula not fully covered by insurance. I had been using my small personal savings to cover these expenses, unwilling to ask for more Preston money and the strings attached to it. The day of the party arrived and our house transformed into a showcase of Diane's event planning skills. Everything was perfect, elegant, and completely impersonal. Nothing reflected James's actual preferences or my input. I spent the morning helping where I could, despite having been up most of the night with a colicky Emma. Diane assigned me to arrange cheese platters while she handled the important details. "Try to do something with your hair before guests arrive," she instructed as she breezed past. "You look exhausted." Guests began arriving at 6, filling our house with the buzz of conversation and the clink of expensive wine glasses. I moved among them, playing hostess, while checking on Emma every 15 minutes, where she napped upstairs with a baby monitor clipped to my waist. James was in his element, accepting birthday wishes and business cards simultaneously as he networked with his father's colleagues. He would occasionally catch my eye across the room and smile, but made no effort to include me in his conversations. Then came time for the cake presentation. Diane had ordered a custom creation from an exclusive bakery, an elaborate tiered affair that must have cost hundreds. "Everyone gather round," she called, clinking a spoon against her glass. "Time to celebrate my wonderful son." The guests formed a circle as James took his place behind the cake. I moved to stand beside him, but Diane subtly shifted to edge me out of the center of attention. "James, darling, make a wish," she prompted as the candles were lit. After he blew them out to applause, Diane began cutting slices, handing them to the caterers to distribute. When she handed me a plate, she said loudly, "Here, Sabina. Though I'm not sure you deserve a piece since you didn't chip in for it." A few nearby guests laughed uncomfortably. My cheeks burned, but I forced a smile and accepted the plate. That might have been the end of it, an embarrassing but private moment. But as I turned to walk away, Diane's voice rang out across the suddenly quiet room. "This broke girl didn't even chip in for the cake. Eat it, you bum." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned to me, expressions ranging from shock to pity to uncomfortable amusement. Even the servers froze in place. I looked to James, desperately hoping he would defend me, say something, anything, to counteract his mother's cruelty. He looked stricken, his face pale, but he remained silent, eyes darting between his mother and me. In that moment, something crystallized within me. The shame and humiliation transformed into a strange, calm clarity. I slowly set my plate down on the nearest table, straightened my shoulders, and smiled the most genuine smile I had felt in months. "Thank you for pointing that out, Diane," I said, my voice steady and carrying across the silent room. "You're right. I didn't contribute to the cake because I was buying medicine for your granddaughter instead. I apologize for my priorities." Without waiting for a response, I picked up a serving knife and began cutting more slices of cake. Who else would like a piece? It really is delicious. The room gradually resumed its buzz, though now with an undercurrent of discomfort. Guests approached me with two bright smiles and overly enthusiastic compliments about the house, or Emma, carefully avoiding any mention of the incident. I moved through the rest of the evening on autopilot, serving cake, refreshing drinks, making small talk, while internally I was making plans. Something had to change. I couldn't continue living this half-life constantly diminished and controlled. When the last guest finally left, James turned to me in the foyer. "Sabina, I'm so sorry about what my mother said. She had too much champagne." "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't make excuses for her. Not tonight." "She didn't mean it," he insisted. "You know how she gets carried away. She meant every word, James. And the worst part is you know it too. You just don't want to admit it." His face hardened slightly. "You're overreacting. It was an unfortunate comment, but you're making it into something bigger. Your mother publicly humiliated me in our home, and you said nothing, did nothing. That is the something bigger, James." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "What do you want me to do? She's my mother. And I'm your wife. I'm supposed to be your partner, but lately I feel more like an inconvenience in the Preston family plan. You're tired. We're both tired. Let's talk about this tomorrow." I shook my head. No more putting it off, no more pretending everything is fine when it's not. But James had already turned away, heading upstairs, effectively ending the conversation, as he had so many times before. That night, I slept in the nursery, curled in the rocking chair next to Emma's crib. As I watched my daughter's peaceful sleeping face, I made a promise to both of us that things would change. I just wasn't sure yet how to make that happen. The morning after the party, I woke with a crick in my neck from sleeping in the rocking chair and a resolve that had solidified overnight. Emma was still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the early morning light filtering through the pink curtains Diane had selected. James was already gone when I went downstairs, a note on the counter saying he had an early meeting and would be home for dinner. No mention of the previous night's events, no acknowledgement of the humiliation or our argument. Just business as usual. I had just finished feeding Emma when the front door opened without a knock. Diane strode in, dressed immaculately, as always, carrying several shopping bags. "I brought breakfast," she announced, setting the bags on the kitchen island. And I thought we could start cleaning up from the party. No apology, no recognition of her behaviour. Just another day in the Preston universe, where Diane's actions had no consequences. "Good morning, Diane," I said calmly, adjusting Emma in my arms. "I didn't expect to see you today. Well, someone needs to help put the house back in order. The caterers left such a mess." As she began unpacking pastries and coffee, chattering about which guests she thought had enjoyed the party and which had been disappointments, I felt a strange detachment. It was as if I was watching a play where I had been cast in a role I never auditioned for. The Hendersons seemed to enjoy themselves. She continued arranging croissants on a plate. Though Susan Henderson's dress was trying much too hard, you could tell it was last season's style. "Diane," I interrupted quietly, "we need to talk about what happened last night." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Sabina, don't be so sensitive. It was just a little joke." Calling me a broke bum in front of all our guests wasn't a joke. It was cruel and deliberate. She turned to face me, her expression hardening. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. This is exactly the problem with you, Sabina. You don't understand our ways, our humour. Your ways is humiliating family members, part of Preston tradition." "You know what I mean?" she sniffed. "You come from a different background. Sometimes the adjustment is difficult. This isn't about background, it's about basic respect." Diane's eyes narrowed. "Respect goes both ways, Sabina. James works hard to provide you with this beautiful home, and you can't even contribute to his birthday celebration." Something inside me snapped. The dam of restraint I had built over 2 years of marriage finally broke. "Let me tell you about contributions, Diane. I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. "I contribute by working as a nurse, saving lives until complications from pregnancy forced me onto unpaid leave. I contribute by being up all night with your colicky granddaughter so your son can sleep for his important meetings. I contribute by swallowing my opinions, my preferences, and my identity to keep peace in this family." Diane looked genuinely startled by my outburst. "I was only trying to help." "No, you were trying to control. There's a difference." "How dare you speak to me this way after everything we've done for you?" she gasped. "We welcomed you into our family, gave you this beautiful home, provided for you and the baby. You didn't welcome me. You tolerated me as long as I played by your rules and stayed in the box you created for me." "You ungrateful girl," Diane hissed. "James was right to be concerned about your stability. Perhaps those postpartum hormones are affecting your judgment." "My judgment is clearer than it's been in years," I replied. "And I think deep down, you know that's what scares you. You're afraid I'll help James see the truth too." Diane's face flushed with anger. "I'm calling James. This conversation is over." She pulled out her phone and dialed, putting it on speaker, either out of habit or to ensure I heard every word. "James, darling, you need to come home right now. Sabina is behaving irrationally. I'm concerned for Emma's safety." My blood ran cold at the manipulation, the casual way she weaponized concern for my daughter. James's voice came through the speaker, tense. "What's happening?" "She's lashing out, making wild accusations. I think she might be having some kind of breakdown." "I'll be right there," he said. "Don't do anything to upset her further." The call ended and Diane gave me a look of triumph. "He'll straighten this out." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "I think he will." I spent the next 30 minutes caring for Emma, ignoring Diane's presence, as she made phone calls in our living room, no doubt sharing her version of events with whoever would listen. When James's car pulled into the driveway, I felt oddly calm, as if watching events unfold from a distance. He burst through the door, face etched with worry. "What's going on? Mum said you're having some kind of episode." "The only episode happening here is your mother's continuing disrespect," I replied evenly. Diane immediately rushed to James's side. "See how she's talking to me. After everything we've done for her, I'm genuinely concerned about her mental state, James." James looked between us, confusion evident. "Can someone please tell me what actually happened?" "Your wife decided to attack me when I simply came over to help clean up from the party," Diane said. "She's been hostile and ungrateful." "That's not what happened," I countered. "Your mother came in without knocking, took over as usual, and when I tried to address her behaviour at the party, she dismissed it as a joke." "The party?" James frowned. "You're still upset about that comment? Mum apologised for that." "No, James, she didn't. She has never apologised, and neither have you." The three of us stood in a triangle of tension in the entryway, years of resentment and unspoken truths hanging in the air between us. "James," I said quietly, "for once, I need you to really hear me. Not your mother's version of me, not the version of me you've constructed to fit neatly into your life. The real me." "Okay." He hesitated, glancing at his mother, who was already opening her mouth to interject. To my surprise, he held up his hand to stop her. "Let Sabina speak, Mom." Taking a deep breath, I laid out everything I'd been holding back. The constant undermining, the financial control, the decisions made, without my input, the subtle and not so subtle ways I'd been made to feel less than since the day I entered the Preston orbit. Last night wasn't an isolated incident, I concluded. It was just the most public example of what's been happening for years. And I can't do it anymore, James. Not to myself and not to Emma. I won't have her grow up thinking this is what love and family look like. Diane scoffed. So dramatic. This is exactly what I mean about her instability. Mom, please, James said, his voice strained. Just let me handle this. Handle this, I repeated. I'm not a problem to be handled, James. I'm your wife, your partner. Or at least I was supposed to be. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times. What do you want from me, Sabina? She's my mother. I want you to choose James. Not between your mother and me, but between the man you've been and the man you promised to be when we married. Between a life where I'm constantly diminished and one where we're truly equal partners. She's manipulating you, Diane interjected. Can't you see that first she got you to marry her, then she had the baby to secure her position, and now she's trying to separate you from your family? Actually, I said, reaching into my pocket, I've been documenting the emotional abuse for months. I pulled out my phone. Text messages, emails, recordings of conversations in my own home. I didn't want to believe it would come to this, but I needed protection. Diane's face went pale. You've been recording me. That's illegal. Not in Oregon, in my own home. One-party consent state. James looked stunned. Sabina, why would you do that? Because I knew this day would come when it would be my word against hers. And historically, you've chosen to believe her. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. James looked between his mother and me, conflict evident in every line of his face. I think, he finally said slowly, that we all need some space to cool down. No, I said firmly. No more avoiding difficult conversations. No more hoping things will magically improve. I need to know where you stand, James, right now. You're forcing him to choose between his mother and his wife, Diane said, voice quivering with manufactured emotion. How selfish can you be? I'm asking him to choose what kind of man, husband and father he wants to be, I corrected. And if you loved your son, truly loved him beyond what he represents for the Preston legacy, you would want him to make that choice freely. How dare you question my love for my son? And Mum, James interrupted, his voice strangely firm. Sabina is right. We do need to talk, just the two of us. Diane's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. James, you can't seriously be considering her accusations after everything we've done. That's just it, Mom. Maybe we need to examine what everything we've done really means. He turned to me. And you're right, Sabina. I haven't been the partner I promised to be. Diane grabbed her purse from the counter. If this is how it's going to be, fine. But don't come crying to me when she takes you for everything you're worth. The prenup only covers so much. This was never about money, I said quietly. It was about dignity. We'll see how much dignity you have when you're a single mother with nothing, Diane spat as she headed for the door. And don't think for a second this is over. The door slammed behind her, leaving James and me alone in a silence that felt both terrifying and necessary. I never wanted it to come to this, I said finally. I know, he sighed heavily. I just didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Where do we go from here, James? He moved to the living room and sank onto the couch. I honestly don't know, but I think we should start by you showing me those recordings. It was a beginning, not an end. A painful but necessary first step toward either healing our marriage or finding the courage to let it go. Either way, for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, breathing air that wasn't thick with someone else's expectations. Emma began to cry upstairs, her timing impeccable as always. I'll get her, I said, heading for the stairs. No, James said, standing. Let me. I think it's time I started really showing up for both of you. As he went upstairs to our daughter, I felt the first cautious stirring of hope. Whatever happened next, I had finally found my voice again. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, James and I sat across from Dr. Miller, the couple's therapist we had been seeing weekly since that day. So how has implementation of the boundaries been going? Dr. Miller asked, her kind face, curious but professional. Better than I expected, I admitted. There was resistance at first, but having clear written agreements helps. James nodded. My mother still struggles with the limited visiting schedule, but she's respecting it. And she actually used Sabina's name 3 times in our last conversation instead of just saying your wife. Progress comes in small steps sometimes. Dr. Miller smiled. And how about the financial restructuring you discussed last week? We've opened a new joint account where both our full salaries go, James explained. And we're making decisions together about any expenses over $200 as agreed. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. After Diane stormed out that day, James and I had spent hours talking, really talking for the first time in years. I shared the recordings reluctantly, not wanting to hurt him, but knowing he needed to hear the truth. The pain in his eyes as he listened to his mother's dismissive comments about me when he wasn't around, her subtle manipulations, her persistent undermining of my role as wife and mother was difficult to witness. But it was necessary pain, the kind that precedes healing. I didn't want to believe she could be like this, he had said, voice thick with emotion. It was easier to think you were overreacting. We both let it happen, I acknowledged. I kept silent too long, and you kept peace at any cost. In the days that followed, James's parents cut off financial support as threatened. James was put on leave from the family business, effectively fired by his own father. The financial adjustment was significant, but not as catastrophic as Diane had predicted. I returned to nursing part-time once Emma turned 6 months old, finding a renewed sense of purpose in my work. James, freed from the golden handcuffs of the family business, took some time to explore what he truly wanted to do. He eventually accepted a position with a boutique marketing firm that valued his experience but allowed for better work-life balance. Our house in West Hills, too expensive to maintain on our reduced income, was sold. We moved to a smaller but cozier home in a family-friendly neighborhood that felt more like us. The relief of being free from that showplace was immense. Neither of us realized how much pressure it had created until it was gone. I've been thinking about inviting my parents for Thanksgiving, I told Dr. Miller. They haven't seen Emma much with everything that's been happening. I think that's a great idea, James agreed. I've always liked your parents. They're genuine. The road to rebuilding trust between us was ongoing. There were still moments of doubt, still old patterns that emerged in times of stress. But we were both committed to the work, both determined to create a healthier family dynamic for Emma's sake, as well as our own. The most surprising development came 3 months after the confrontation, when James's father, Richard, reached out privately. Your mother and I aren't doing well, James, he had admitted over coffee. Seeing what happened with you and Sabina has made me realize some uncomfortable truths about my own marriage. Richard began visiting us without Diane getting to know his granddaughter and unexpectedly becoming an ally in establishing healthier family boundaries. She's always been controlling, he told us. I just found it easier to give in. But watching what it did to your marriage woke me up. Diane's first attempt at reconciliation came when Emma turned 1. She sent a carefully worded email asking if she could attend the small birthday celebration we had planned. I've been doing some reflection, she wrote. And while I don't agree with everything that's been said, I miss my son and granddaughter. After discussing it thoroughly with Dr. Miller, we decided to allow a short visit with clear parameters. Diane arrived with an extravagant gift, but to her credit, didn't complain when we explained that we were opening presents the following day to keep the party simple for Emma. She looks happy, Diane commented, watching Emma toddle around the yard in her birthday outfit. You've done well with her. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and for Diane that was significant progress. The healing extended beyond our immediate family. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, including Tara, who welcomed me back without judgment. I knew you'd find your way, she said when we met for coffee. You just needed to remember who you were. My parents, who had watched helplessly as I disappeared into the Preston world, were cautiously optimistic about the changes they saw in me. You're smiling again, my mother observed. A real smile that reaches your eyes. The most profound healing, however, was internal. The Sabina who had been slowly erased was re-emerging stronger and wiser for the experience. I found joy again in simple pleasures, my garden, my nursing work, quiet evenings with James and Emma, where no one's opinion mattered but our own. Emma's first birthday party became a symbol of our new beginning. Unlike the elaborate Pinterest perfect events Diane would have orchestrated, it was a casual backyard gathering with close friends, homemade cake, and a toddler more interested in the wrapping paper than the gifts. As I watched James helping Emma blow out her single candle, Diane standing awkwardly but respectfully to the side, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep and we were cleaning up the last of the party debris, James pulled me into an embrace. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For fighting for us when I couldn't see we needed saving. I leaned into his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had first drawn me to him years ago in that hospital room. We saved each other. The journey continues as all journeys do. There are still difficult moments, still occasional visits from Diane that leave me tense, still financial pressures and parenting disagreements. but underneath it all runs a current of mutual respect that had been missing before. I often think about what I would tell my younger self, the Sabina who fell in love with James and thought love alone would be enough. I would tell her that love is necessary but not sufficient, that healthy relationships require boundaries, respect, and sometimes difficult confrontations, that the price of peace should never be your dignity. But mostly I would tell her that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, to stand in your truth, and to build a life that reflects your values rather than someone else's expectations. That lesson, hard won through tears and confrontation, is perhaps the greatest gift I can pass on to Emma as she grows. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult family situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it gives you courage for whatever battles you're facing in your own life.